So all that talk about, all this discussion of nuclear disasters sort of takes us up right to the current global concern of potential nuclear disaster, and that is in Ukraine. With the Ukrainian invasion, that triggers this worry and fighting, etc., and that brings nuclear disasters again to the forefront of global concern and people worrying about this stuff. So the way Ukraine was working up to the start of the current war, they had 15 pressurized water reactors. So these are Russian design, because recall that until the end of the Cold War, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. I would say, just for point of clarity, that when the Soviet Union dissolved, it dissolved very fast, very quickly. Ukraine had a ton of nuclear weapons. And so when the Soviet Union ceased to exist, they had a bunch of them. They opted to give up all of their nuclear weapons with the agreement that the U.S., if anything happened to them, the U.S. would defend them. I think that's an important thing to talk about as the war is unfolding right now, and as currently the U.S. is pulling back support for this democracy. But anyway, so they have these 15 reactors spread across the country in 2022. They're getting close to connecting to the European grid, but they're not connected. They actually ultimately connect to the European electrical grid about 3 weeks after the war starts. Okay, this is the lay of the land with regards to their reactors. They have 6 at Zaporizhzhia, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. There's 3 a little bit west of there, and then if we go up to the northeastern part of the country, we have 2 other nuclear power plant sites. So the Russian invasion happens. They start to do all their due, and everybody thinks, or many people think, that the Russians are just going to roll over this little country, right? The lead up to this is Russia wanting to be Russia, and Russia wanting to control everything around it, and massive propaganda for several years. It begins with the invasion of the Crimean Peninsula in 2014, and then Russia says, ours, and then Putin starts in this insane ramble. I know we're not used to leaders of countries being insane and saying totally crazy stuff, but he's doing that. And he says things like, everybody knows Russia has always been, or Ukraine has always been Russian. It's all completely fake. It's ahistorical. It's not real. And so he starts this whole thing, and we must get in there. And then, just like maybe some other rhetoric you've been hearing lately, there's all these Nazis, all these people that hate other people. We got to go in and save them. And that's the pretext for going in and doing the war. So they go in, and the thought is initially that within about 3 days, Russia will have completely taken over the entire country of Ukraine. Obviously, that did not happen. But they do move fairly quickly to get a lot of territory, right? And one of the things that happens is they move, started getting close to this large power plant. Just as this war is starting, nuclear power is fantastically important to the country of Ukraine. It's more than half of their electricity comes from these nuclear power plants, right? So they're really, really dependent on nuclear and coal, and that's about everything. That's about where all their, so very old technology, Soviet legacy technologies, essentially, is what's powering their electrical grid. Okay, and so pretty quickly, Russia starts to close in from all these sides. And if you have a look, the Chernobyl site is in that first the red is where the Russians are moving in. Very quickly, they get to and overrun this not a nuclear power plant site, but the former nuclear power plant site. Remember, that melted down in 1986. And so this is the first thing that gets people worried. So if you're in the back, can't see it. Immediately stop firing. You're endangering the safety of the entire world. The operation of a crucial part of the Zaporizhzhia plant could be damaged. This is inside the control room. We will not be able to restore it. You're endangering the safety of the entire world. Attention, stop firing at this nuclear facility. Right? So the war is coming to the nuclear power plant, which is, I think we could all agree, not a good thing. Right? Not a good thing for the people with the bullets, but also not a good thing for the people that are far away from the bullets either. So Russia invades in late February. The International Atomic Energy Agency is informed that Russia, is within a day or so of the invasion starting. Russia now has control of this of the 30-kilometer exclusion zone, of which the former nuclear power plant is in the center of it. They have control of it, right? And then, as we see in March, the biggest power plant in the other part of the country, and the part of the country that's closer to Russia, starts coming under fire, right? Rockets are hitting, all these various things are happening. Some type of projectile, it's hard to know, was it a shell, what was it? But something doesn't hit the reactor building, thank God, but hits a building next to it, starts a little mini fire. And then eventually, Russia moves in and just takes over the entirety of the plant. Which is where we are today. At the time, there were 6 reactors. They've been now shut down. So they've been turned off. So they are not producing. That's a good soundtrack to the nuclear end of the world. So they shut them down, and basically they haven't been operating for electricity since.
Welcome to our viewers in PBS in America and around the globe. President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of nuclear terror after Russian forces bombarded a large nuclear power station, causing a fire. The authorities say the Zaporizhzhia plant, which is the biggest of its kind in Europe, is now secure and that radiation levels are normal. They say that emergency services have now been able to access the plant. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba warned Russia earlier to stop firing immediately if a major disaster was to be prevented. Our correspondent Mark Lobel gave me this update.
As you say, never good when the largest nuclear power plant of its type in Europe catches fire, when smoke is seen around what now seems to be the perimeter, this administrative building, so not the actual reactors themselves, which is a relief to people. But the US president has been speaking to the Ukrainian president about it. We're hearing updates about this plant from the US Energy Secretary. They're saying that it has robust containment structures and the reactors are being safely shut down.
That's a rocket hitting the plant.
So from that point of view, less concerning. But both President Zelensky and Biden are appealing to the Russians to let firefighters in and appealing for this area, for the fighting to stop around this area. So Russian tanks were trying to take hold of the plant in the last couple of days, but there was resistance from workers and residents of the area. And this seems to have escalated in shelling, which is being blamed on the Russians by a neighbouring mayor, that caused the smoke to rise. And if I could just
saying, bringing our viewers into this conversation, just to say, obviously, we're looking at pictures of that nuclear plant. It is reasonably difficult to work out exactly what has been going on there. We've been scanning these pictures, Mark, for the last couple of hours or so.
Okay, so again, there's 6 nuclear reactors there. It's a very large facility. There's a lot of structures and everything, but these things with the sort of orange parts, those are the main reactor buildings. Over there was the area that you were seeing, I think, burning. There's storage tanks for nuclear fuel and everything. But so not a good thing that these guys were under attack. Thankfully, it was the training center that video was showing, so it wasn't the main reactor building on fire. But it could easily, who knows, geez, but for the grace of God, that rocket falls over there as opposed to there. Not a good situation. So then Russia takes over, and then immediately they turn off all the feeds. So if you go to the website, as I did, this is what you saw back then, right? It was turned off, and it remains turned off to this day. So now there's still the people that run the plant are there, but now the Russians have taken over, and they have guns, and there's guys with guns in the control room telling these guys what to do, right? And if you don't do what we say, we're going to go shoot your family in the town, right? That level of kind of stuff. And so the Russians turn off all the international monitoring stuff. So many of our nuclear power plants, particularly in contested areas of the world, we share information with the IAEA, other agencies, other safety agencies in the countries. All that stuff gets flicked off, right? So nobody knows what's going on, what the radiation level is, what the generation level is, and so that's a challenge. So. The worry is, okay, so now we're, so as this was going on, then people started to also say, hey, what's going on with with the Chernobyl site, right? So again, the site has a sarcophagus around it. There are a few people that still live there, but they're mostly old retirees. They couldn't have anywhere else to go, and they went back after the evacuation. But for the most part, this is a place where people don't go. Now we have troops coming in, and the Russians are coming in, and they want to stop the Ukrainians, so they start digging into the soil. Now, no one has dug into this soil in 30 years, 40 years, right? Because everybody's gone. So there's this worry that first and foremost, these guys are in this radiation zone, right? And so their very activity of driving tanks around, digging ditches, explosions, kicking up stuff, we're going to aerosolize stuff that might be radioactive. So you might be breathing it in, right? Or the troops might be breathing that in, that kind of stuff. One. Two, the other big worry about the Chernobyl site is we might break this sarcophagus, this decades to build thing that people from all around the world came to build that was constructed to keep the radiation in. It wasn't constructed to keep bombs out, right? And it's a big thing, right? So even damage in one part of it could weaken the integrity of the whole structure, might make it, fall down, collapse kind of thing. Yeah, and so we just have all this stuff going on. And then with regards to the reactors, right, there's this great worry that if we lose power, because by the way, guys are shooting at it, maybe we won't even be able to turn on our emergency generators. Now recall, even though these reactors are now turned off, they still require maintenance. Turning off doesn't mean like go away. Turning off means we're not actively producing electricity, but they still need to be cooled, even in their sort of mellow stages, right? So we still need water, we still need some electricity. And so as all this stuff becomes a problem, and you can imagine getting emergency generators to go in a country at war where everybody's scavenging all the diesel fuel to run them. It's just a nightmare. So yeah, and then there's the worry that maybe somebody just might outright steal the fuel and sell it, and all these things, dirty bombs, all this kind of worries. These worries are put out. So the IAEA has been actively engaged with this, trying to help, right? Again, it's a war zone, so they're not a war-fighting agency. But so they've recently come up, this is the third revision of these things, and it basically says you shouldn't shoot at a nuclear power plant during war, right? Can you guys please not shoot at the nuclear power plant during war? And other things of that nature. Okay, so where we are in terms of the history of stuff, this is the history of the war, I think, in the context of potential nuclear disasters. So in February of 2022, right, like I said, just as in the early phases of the invasion, The Russian forces take over Chernobyl, and they have control of it. By March, they've captured, as we just mentioned, this nuclear power, this biggest nuclear power plant, and the shelling sort of continues. Eventually, the Russians pull back from Chernobyl, as they pull back from a lot of Ukraine when they start getting their butts kicked, right? When they start getting, thinking that they just roll in. They did not plan for an invasion. They planned for a lightning strike, and so they didn't have the right equipment. They didn't have the right people. They didn't train their people. In fact, the reports are all from the Russian soldiers. They didn't even know that. They thought this was a training exercise. So you would think that if you're going to go invade a country, you would prep your folks so they kind of know what to do. Most of these guys were like, this is weird. Oh, it sounds like those guys are using live ammunition. That's kind of weird. And then they only realized they were at war when they were in the country, right? So this wasn't like a super well planned. This was all under the assumption that this would be over in a day or a couple days. So they have to turn back with their tails tucked, right? And they pull away. And so as they pull away, then Ukraine regains control of the disaster site. They pick up shelling again, and stuff just keeps going around these other nuclear power, around Zaporizhzhia. Continues to go on, and we lose power from Zaporizhzhia in the summer of 2022. There's a growing concern that war fighting on both sides is threatening this big giant nuclear power plant as we continue into the summer, and finally by the end of that summer, everything just turns off, and nothing has been turned on since then as far as power production goes. The next year in 2023, and so then the war is going on, and essentially the heavy movement stops, and people are just sitting there shooting each other. And then essentially both sides start to put mines around. So that really locks in the front line. So there's not a huge amount of change after, by the time we get to like 2023. And so one of the things that happens is this big dam, which is near where the Zaporizhzhia site is. And so the dam creates a reservoir. The reservoir is one of the sources of water that is used to cool the power plant. It's blown up. It's unclear who blows it up, but it blows up. And so now the water level is much lower than it otherwise was. So that's a concern. There's more attacks in August, and there's a fire in near one of the cooling towers. And then more Russian attacks where they're actively late 2023, they actively begin to attack all of the energy infrastructure for the country. And again, how that relates to the nuclear accident is that the other power plants now are threatened, right? So now they don't have stable electricity, so they have to make sure that they have their own, double, triple check that they have redundant power supplies so that they don't maybe get into a bad situation. As of last year, there's more and more reported activity around these nuclear sites. And we're starting to see drones flying in and around these sites, Russian drones. I'll just say it keeps getting worse in 2024. We see stuff like this.
Today, upon completion of the 26th rotation of the personnel from the IAEA support and assistance mission to the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant, ISAMS, one of the vehicles of the team was attacked with a drone in the territory of Ukraine. Fortunately, there were no victims and our teams are safe. The rotation has been completed. As Director General of the IAEA, I condemn in the most firm terms this attack on the IAEA staff. We call once again, as we have done it before, for the utmost restraint. I have said in the past that attacking a nuclear power plant is a no-go. Attacking those who care for the nuclear safety and security of these plants is even more unacceptable. Today,
okay, so that was December, right? And so that was a clearly marked vehicle. And the way these drones work, you can see what they're about to run into. And I think as you all saw on that vehicle, it's clearly marked as IAEA. Maybe somebody thought they were masquerading as IAEA, but clearly you could tell what this vehicle was. And thankfully it didn't blow up the whole vehicle, but it clearly came close, right? If that had hit the gas tank or whatever, it would have been bad. Okay. So then this year, where are we this year? So this year, we're seeing more and more military activity near these plants. President Trump is inaugurated in January 20th. And don't forget, you can't forget that the whole first impeachment thing with the president was built around this, right? It was built around Ukrainian stuff. Trumped up. I'll just say debunked statements, but nevertheless, it's come from here. So that's also part of the background, is that President Trump has a personal grudge, it's pretty clear, against these folks. And so he's inaugurated, and Russia is like, awesome, love this. This sounds great, right? And this is after the military aid that we were providing to Ukraine was held up for about 6 months in Congress by forces aligned with President Trump. I'll just say that. So President Trump comes in office and he famously said, I'll shut down the war in the first day. And then he said, I'll shut down the war in 3 days from being elected. So he starts a 100-day campaign to end the war. And I'll just say we're getting near day 100. And so then we have this, which again, I don't want to get into politics, but I think it's relevant to understanding the nuclear situation we're in. So we'll just play
Welcome to the News Hour. An extraordinary scene in the Oval Office today as President Donald Trump made a public break with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
The two presidents, as well as Vice President Vance, argued for nearly 5 minutes with the cameras rolling, a spectacle that could have profound effects on Ukraine and the U.S. relationship with Europe. Here's Nick Schifrin.
In the Oval Office today, an unprecedented, unmitigated train wreck.
The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
What follows is the majority of the war of words over a country at war, beginning with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky doubting any diplomacy with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
He broken this ceasefire. He killed our people and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the President for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this.
You're
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the
the
cards right now. With us, you start having
not playing
cards.
cards.
But right now, you don't.
I'm
Yeah,
very
you're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War III.
what do you
You're
think
gambling
about?
with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's
with
back
all
to you.
respect to your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said
very
they
respect.
should have.
Have you said thank you once this
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting, have
today.
you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of
are you
America
speaking about?
and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you
He's
can...
not speaking loudly. He's not
Yeah.
speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
can
We
I-
gave you, through
I
this
said thank
stupid
you.
president, $350 billion.
You voted
We gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment.
You
and your
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about
if,
West
if
speaking?
you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me-
equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3
okay?
days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
Maybe
new.
less.
In 2 weeks. Of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. You have to be thankful. You don't have the
I'm
cards.
thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
tell you
You're
again,
running
I
low on
know.
soldiers.
Don't-
Listen, it's going to be a tough deal to make because the attitudes have to change. Your people are very brave, but you're either going to make a deal or we're out.
And that's exactly what President Trump did. After the meeting, he wrote on Truth Social, "I've determined that President Zelensky is not ready for peace if America is involved. He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he's ready for peace." Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation left without the economic deal that he came here to sign. Moscow responded with glee. Former Russian president and deputy chair of the Security Council Dmitry Medvedev tweeted, "The insolent pig finally got a proper slapdown in the Oval Office, and Donald Trump is right. The Kyiv regime is gambling with World War III." For weeks, European leaders have been trying to prevent a U.S.-Ukraine break. This week, they thought they made progress, with Trump suggesting just yesterday Ukraine could gain back occupied territory.
We're going to see if we can get it back or get a lot of it back for Ukraine, if that's possible.
But what a difference a day makes.
You're not acting at all thankful, and that's not a nice thing. I'll be honest, that's not a nice thing.
Today, Europe rallied to Zelensky's defense. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen wrote, "Your dignity honors the bravery of the Ukrainian people." The European Union's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, wrote, "Today it became clear that the free world needs a new leader. It's up to us, Europeans, to take this challenge." And French President Emmanuel Macron.
We have to thank all those who have helped and respect all those who, from the beginning, have done the fighting, because they're fighting for their dignity, their independence, for their children, and for the security of Europe.
What I think? Complete, utter disaster.
But back at the White House, Trump and Ukraine ally South Carolina Republican Lindsey Graham said diplomacy with Zelensky was all but dead.
I talked to Zelensky this morning. Don't take the bait. What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelensky.
Welcome to the new.
Okay, so you get the idea. Obviously, nuclear power plants are but a small part of this whole story, but that is where we are in terms of trying to have diplomatic relations. It is completely nuts. So the thing that just came up last month, excuse me, was Trump said, "Hey, maybe you should just give us that power plant." So Zelensky was there to sign a deal to give away a lot of their mineral rights to the U.S. because President Trump said, "Well, you should pay us back for that. So you should give us all these minerals." That's what he was there to sign an agreement, and that's what didn't get signed. So the Trump administration said, "You have to do this, or we're not going to provide any more aid to you." So most recently with that, the idea was floated by the president that, hey, why don't we just take over your power plants? And that could be good, right? Why don't you just give us your nuclear power plants? In the same time, there are starting to be some conversations. Eventually, the U.S. and Ukraine temporarily make up. Unfortunately, I use that term temporarily. And so we suspended all of our intelligence sharing with them. We suspended all of our active military cooperation. We turned off the satellites, all that kind of stuff. And March 11th, the Pentagon prevailed and said, maybe we should not bail on the democracy fighting Russia right now. And so they began resharing intelligence in March. And then I mentioned Trump said, well, maybe we just take over your power plants. Just yesterday, there was supposed to be a high-level peace negotiation brokered by the U.S. and to take place in London. And Secretary Rubio said, nope, I'm done. I'm out of here. So he pulls out. And Vice President Vance says that the negotiations for a peace deal with Russia are at a so-called critical juncture, and that he thinks that we should just freeze the lines where they are right now, which is a known no-go for the Ukrainians. They're like, no, we're not giving away a fifth of our country. Like that's not the starting position we're going to open with, right? And so then today, this is what happened today. So President Trump posted the post that's over there on the right on his social media company, and the key line, there's a bunch of stuff in there where he refers to President Obama as Hussein Obama and all that kind of typical stuff. But then he says, referring to President Zelensky, he says, he can have peace or he can fight for another 3 years before losing the whole country. So the title looks as if it's like, oh, we're breaking off the peace negotiations, but really it appears to all be aimed at Ukraine. There appears to be no penalties for Russia. It's all about you do what we say, Ukraine, or we're going to break this off. So again, Russia seems to be very happy with all of this as this is playing out. So this is where we are right now. So this is what the power plants, this is where we are in terms of our nuclear situation for nuclear disasters in Ukraine right now. So this is a map from a couple days ago. So the red here is the territory of Ukraine that is currently under control of Russia. So the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant, this big circle here, there's six reactors, that are depowered, right? That are not producing electricity. The South Ukraine plant has 3 reactors that are currently operating. Up here 2, up here 4. The 4 have 2 different models of power plants. They're sort of older generation than a newer generation, but still that's it. And then you can see where Chornobyl is, which is very close to the capital of Kyiv in the northern part of the country. And so right now, Russia controls about 1/5 of the territory of Ukraine. And in there is somewhere on the order of 3 to 3.5 million Ukrainians that are living now under Russian rule. And they also, again, control the largest of the nuclear power plants. So here's a look at the energy. In this case, this is energy consumption. So this isn't production. So this also includes non-electricity. This includes like gasoline in your cars and stuff. But the world is on top. Ukraine, we don't have data from before the mid 80s, but still, this is what we have for. It wasn't segregated out from the Soviet Union, so this is what we have for these guys. And what we can see is the energy consumption back in the Soviet Union, which many of us consider, inefficient and very polluting and all that kind of stuff. Still, folks were consuming a lot more energy than now, right? So this is usually an indicator of a country that's having a hard time, right? They're not suddenly becoming ultra more efficient. They're not using as much energy. So that sort of decays at the end of the Cold War, and then is pretty much holding constant up until the time when we start to have this unrest, much of which is fueled by Russian propaganda and the previous president. So Zelensky comes to power because the previous president pretty clearly is a puppet regime of Russia. And when he's ousted, he runs to Moscow. So he doesn't just go to his house in Ukraine. He runs away. And so the Russians invade the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. You see stuff sort of tick down. And then as the war is playing out, we don't have data from 2024 yet. This is the annual data from 2023. What we see is less and less economic output, as you would expect from a war zone, right? As you expect from people that are busy shooting at each other as opposed to growing food and doing all the other stuff that we're doing. But even so, even with the situation, nuclear is still a significant chunk of the power production, right? So it's pretty much a no-go to just flip off the switches of these plants, right? It would have major consequences for these folks. They are so dependent still on this type of thing. We're seeing more and more in the last many weeks in the wake of President Trump's coming to power. We're seeing more and more Russian activity, particularly trying to attack hospitals, energy infrastructure, etc. In a pretty clear ploy to make the world think that they're just going to advance and take everything over and give the impression that the Ukrainians are crumbling. But it is true that Ukrainians are hurting. I mean, to be sure, it's 3 years in, and so for the nuclear power plants, we're seeing nearby attacks, and in some cases reduction in power output, meaning there's problems with the plant operating. We're seeing air raids going on, and in fact, some international inspectors have had to shelter during some of these air raids, so this is not propaganda, we know this is happening. We're seeing more and more drones all over the country, including over the areas where we have nuclear power plants, and also in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Zaporizhzhia, the big plant, has had explosions all around the plant as the war fighting it's almost on the front lines, not exactly on the front, but it's very close to the front lines. And so again, all it takes is one wrong shell, one errant shell to expose a reactor core to the air. And we're seeing a lot of connections, reconnections, stuff. So there is absolutely some maintenance going on. So it's not as if it hasn't been evacuated. I don't want to give you that impression. But it's a stressful thing to do maintenance in a war zone, right? And the IAEA is still able to have some presence at the Zaporizhzhia plant. They're at all the plants, but they are able to be at this big plant that Russia controls, but they've been constrained. They can't go everywhere they would like to go and inspect all the components they would like to inspect. Here's just a quick video, and then we'll go on to
this. Compromises the safety of a power plant, and it could eventually lead to an accident. The first have been in August, and then the reason that this is so important from the perspective of the IAEA, of course, is because of the influence of this situation on the safety of the nuclear power plant's operation. Having external power supply is essential. And of course, the situation is quite dire. We should not, I think, hide the fact, and as you can see behind us, this infrastructure has been degraded, but I must say that I'm impressed with the work, with the effort that is being put in order to ensure nuclear safety. We are trying from the IAEA.
Okay. So it's also important to say that that this is not this concern about nuclear disasters in the context of conflict is not merely constrained to Ukraine, unfortunately. So this is from a few years ago, but we have seen other problems. So we have seen in wars in the Middle East and things of that nature, errant weapons striking nuclear facilities or very close to or actually striking nuclear facilities. And so this is a map of potential exposures, right? Of what could, running a simulation, if this power plant breaches, where might it go? And what you see is there's potential exposure all in the Gulf, up around southern Turkey and the Middle East, in Egypt, out in Turkmenistan, all these places, right? So these areas that are in conflict zones are by definition potentially at risk, right? And obviously we think of the people that are at risk and other things, but nuclear disasters are a potentially unique one. If we blow up an oil derrick, that's bad. It's going to cause an oil spill. It's going to, this and that. If we blow up a hospital, it's going to kill a bunch of patients. But if we hit one of these nuclear power plants, there's the possibility of a major scale, depending on how it plays out, major scale release that would affect a large region for potentially a large amount of time. So where we are in the U.S. right now, just to close up this topic, and then see if you guys have questions, is so our nuclear production and energy production in our country peaked about a decade ago, and we've been declining since. As far as I can tell, I might be off one or two here, but I think we have about 104 operating reactors across the U.S. In 2012, and now we're down to 94. So my most recent survey this morning counted 94. There's some, yeah, okay, I'll put a pause on that. So we're generating about 100,000 megawatts. As I mentioned, the president seems interested in taking over power plants in other countries now. That's another new thing, so that's different. And where the industry is going right now is partly in response to these kinds of worries over nuclear disasters, is smaller. So historically, our power infrastructure is built around a big honkin' major production facility and then a bunch of power lines that take it to you guys in the city and the hospital and the wherever the heck, right? So just like we're talking about microgrids for sustainability with solar and wind and other things, we're also sort of beginning to speak more in that same language for things like nuclear power. So the current technology, the current frontier is not big honkin' power plants like the biggest one in Europe. It's a lot of small, so-called modular nuclear. So rather than a big, huge thing that's going to take up all of campus, let's say, smaller, that might be the size of this lecture hall, or maybe 3 or 4 of these lecture halls kind of thing, right? Obviously produce a lot less electricity for any one particular plant, but you could sort of Lego block them together to make, twice as much, 3 times, or whatever the output is. Because they're much smaller, they're easy, theoretically, they should be easier to permit, they're easier to site locate, etc. And the idea is these new designs could be inherently more safe. So the people that are designing them are trying to make them safe regardless of if there's power or not, right? So obviously if they blow up, that's releasing radiation. But like say the tsunami or something that would come in and cause a problem, we need to have some extra power. They're trying to design them in a different way than these power plants that were mostly designed in the 50s and 60s to deal with that kind of stuff. And security is absolutely one of the things that's motivating folks for that. And we signed a new law about a year and a half ago, I can't remember, to basically encourage the U.S. to do more of these, this is a congressional law, to do more of this kind of more smaller scale nuclear, right? As far as our energy policy in the U.S., President Trump, when he came in, signed one of his many executive orders, one of which declared an energy emergency, and then defined solar as not energy, defined wind as not energy, and most renewables as not energy. But nuclear is considered an energy source, according to the president. So that's an emergency one. So that should theoretically help ease some of the regulations for the permitting for additional nuclear facilities in the U.S. Although it is true that with all the cuts from DOGE and everything, we've radically cut a lot of the safety staff and the oversight staff from many of our agencies. So that's where we are in terms of the U.S. right now. A lot of the comments related to this in the last few months have been the cuts, particularly to the Department of Energy, are not really understood. That the Department of Energy, while it also takes care of energy, it also takes care of nuclear weapons. So one of the things that we talked about earlier was the fact that a lot of the public confuses nuclear power with nuclear weapons. And it seems like we were kind of getting away from that, but the current administration seems to have no idea about the difference between the two things. So when they've cut things because they wanted to just save time, one of the main things they cut is a lot of our safety staff that deal with nuclear security and the security officers around bases and the people that produce the fuels that go into these plants. And so, I mean, that's the world we're in right now. So that is where we are as of right now. Questions? Questions you guys have about any of that?